Hey everyone, fair warning, this is the most disturbing story I've posted on the channel yet, so viewer discretion is advised. With that, I hope you enjoy the video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's get into the story. On a stormy night in October 1995, in a forgotten mining town in the rural United States, where the roads were cracked and the air thick with smog, a baby was born under the greatest misfortune. The child's cries pierced a run-down, isolated house on the edge of town. Scattered around, empty bottles, outnumbered diapers, and formula. Horribly disfigured, the child hid away in the home's dingy concrete basement, sleeping only on a damp, stained mattress. Ashamed of his appearance, James spent his youth peering out a small crack in the house's foundation, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes and play tag. As the years passed, James's envy and resentment towards his abusive, drunk mother and the neighborhood kids grew. They began taunting James from the sidewalk in front of his house. Day after day, they'd throw stones at the walls and yell, "Here, piggy piggy, here," while squealing like a pig. You see, due to James's deformities, he could barely speak. Instead, he could only make a sound that resembled a squealing pig. Despite his now 6'8", 280-pound frame, James remained meek and with self-hatred. His mother, now very sick, James had at least escaped the relentless and repetitive beatings and verbal abuse. However, James's only source of sustenance were the mice and roaches he'd capture burrowing into his deteriorating mattress. Before she was sick, his mother would throw scraps of meat down the stairs for him to eat, but this became less and less frequent. He drank only from a small leak in a rusty water line above his mattress. Years of non-existent hygiene practices left James with only small, sparse, brown rotting teeth. His tiny black eyes sat too close together on his inflamed red face. Greasy, thin strands of black hair fell over the same canvas jumpsuit James has been wearing for years. Hungry and in search of a more substantial meal, James ventured out of his damp basement dwelling and creeped up the stairs. Creaking the door open slowly, James was hit with a foul smell. That's when he saw the decomposing body of his mother soaking into the ragged, declining chair that she had been calling home for years. Largely unfazed by the gruesome sight and still starving, James considered the unthinkable. But whatever humanity he had left stopped him from filling his stomach. The weather was getting colder, and James's food supply diminished. He got hungrier and hungrier, and the taunting from the street only seemed to get more persistent. Desperate to stay alive, James layered on whatever raggedy clothes and sheets he could find and disappeared out the back door and into the wilderness that surrounded that small, God-forsaken town. James spent months and then years watching over the derelict town from the side of a distant mountain forest, hidden by a range of tree cover. He built a small shelter out of mud and sticks. When he was lucky, a small stream provided him with fish that had been fouled by the pollution from the mine. Although now distanced, the taunting played over and over in James's mind as he peered down. With every month that passed, James deteriorated even further, becoming less and less human. Whatever soul James had left allowed him to feel just enough emotion to sob himself to sleep every night as he stared down at his now abandoned, barricaded house. Even though that life was pitiful and traumatic, it was somehow better than this. Becoming more isolated and resentful, though, James dared not ever return to the town below. One evening, while hunched over the small creek watching for fish, James heard the faint chatter of some kids yelling and laughing. Afraid and not wanting to be discovered, James retreated back into some thick brush about 100 yards behind his shelter to save himself from ridicule. He watched as two neighborhood kids he recognized approached his shelter, laughing and swinging around sticks. "Here, piggy piggy, oink oink," they taunted. You see, unbeknownst to James, rumor had spread around the small town once his mother had passed away. The lore of the Pigman was now a popular topic among kids and even some adults in the neighborhood. The legend told of James, his upbringing, his deformity, and how he escaped into the woods once he could no longer live in the house anymore. Although, as rumors often do, they developed and spun untruths into their web. The legend floating around suggested that James had actually eaten some of his mother's body the night he discovered her. As the kids reached James's shelter, they yelled, "Is this your hut, Piggy? Oink, oink, oink," and laughed. "Come out, Piggy. I have some of your mother's flesh for you to eat. Are you hungry?" James stayed out of view. Tears flowed from his eyes as he watched the kids destroy his shelter, laughing and taunting. Once the kids had left, James emerged from the foliage and walked over to the ruins of his shelter he had once called home. It was completely destroyed. The only thing, the last thing that James had, was now a pile of insignificant debris in front of him. His weeping turned into rage as he stood over his shelter looking down at the town. He clenched his fists and saw red. Whatever small bit of humanity remained in James left him that night. He had now fully turned into the monster he had been accused of being his entire life. James stood in that exact spot all night, watching, becoming one with his rage, imagining his revenge over and over and over, and when the time was right, James would finally give the people exactly what they had been saying he was this entire time. He'd give them a monster, someone who fed off of human flesh, someone from their nightmares. He'd give them the Pigman. Days and nights passed, rain, even some snow poured down on James as he stood still, spiraling deeper and deeper into his rage-fueled fantasies. Until one night, his opportunity arose, and what an opportunity it was. James wiped the rancid fish juice from his mouth when he heard a familiar sound. The same sound he had heard only a few nights prior. It was the sound of the kids who destroyed his shelter. This time, though, something was different. Very different. Instead of scurrying off into the thick woods like he did the last time, an evil, twisted, diabolical smile exposed his rotting, sparse teeth. James retreated slightly back into the shadows of the dark forest with the destroyed shelter only 100 feet in front of him. He watched quietly. "Here, Piggy Piggy," he heard. Oink oink, followed by laughter and chuckles. James watched as the kids who destroyed his shelter emerged into his field of view. They kicked at the ruins of his once home, continuing their taunting calls. Suddenly, the commotion stopped, and the kids stood silent as one of them bent down and picked up the rotting fish carcass James had been feasting on just moments ago. Arm extended, he dangled it, pinching it by the tail. The two boys looked at each other concerned. "Was this here the other night?" one of the boys asked the other. Before he could answer, a sinister, deafening shriek ran out through the forest, followed by a few deep, grunting pig sounds. One clearly much faster than the other, the boys took off running, trying to escape whatever horror was behind them. As they tried to escape down the thick shrubbery on the mountainside, one of the boys tripped and connected with the cold, hard dirt. When the other boy turned around to help his friend, he saw a sight so horrific it's almost unmentionable. A towering creature with torn rags for clothes, inflamed red infected skin stood over the boy. The creature's small, black, beady eyes peered out from behind his long, black, thin, stringy hair as he let out another pig-like screech. Before the boy could react, James lifted him with ease and bit into his neck. In shock and stumbling, the friend took off running down the mountain, desperate to escape the woods and get help. As he ran, all the way down, the sound of the pig squealing and his friend's screams filled the otherwise silent night air. For James, this was the first night of his life that he was no longer hungry. But there was something that satisfied his hunger even more than the flesh, and that was revenge. The one who escaped returned only an hour later with authorities, but to their surprise, there was nothing there. Only a small amount of blood was found at the destroyed shelter site, but no sign of the boy or James. Some believe this story is made up, but some believe James just moved locations, that he's still watching that town, or maybe a town close to it, from a distant mountainside waiting for his next meal to stroll along. Let me know in the comments if you think James is still out there. Anyway, thanks for watching and be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.